The African American struggle for equal rights began when the Civil War ended. Slavery was outlawed, but in the Deep South, Jim Crow laws segregated whites and African Americans. In the early 1900s, W.E.B. Du Bois and others created the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, or the NAACP. The goal of the NAACP was to challenge racist laws in court. NAACP action brought many important civil rights cases to the Supreme Court. In 1951, African-American Oliver Brown sued his local school board because his daughter was forced to travel a great distance to attend an African-American school, when a white school stood only blocks from his house. On May 17, 1954, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled in Brown v. Board of Education of Topeka that segregated schools were unconstitutional. The next year, it ordered Southern school boards to desegregate quickly. Desegregation faced great resistance. Orville Faubus, the governor of Arkansas, promised that segregation would continue in his state. When 9 African-American students tried to attend a high school in Little Rock, Faubus called in the State National Guard to stop them. When violence erupted, President Eisenhower sent federal troops to restore the peace. Around this time, another effort to end segregation took place. In 1955, Rosa Parks was riding a bus in Montgomery, Alabama. She refused to give her seat to a white man, and so she was arrested.
Well, we hope to achieve equal rights as any human being deserves. That's what we are working for.
Martin Luther King Jr., a minister in the city, helped organize a boycott against the city buses. For more than a year, African Americans refused to ride the buses. On December 21, 1965, the Supreme Court ruled that segregation on buses was unconstitutional. These important events began a peaceful movement that aimed to end unequal treatment for African Americans. Dr. King was a leading force in that movement. On August 28, 1963, King led 250,000 civil rights activists in the March on Washington, D.C. At the end of the march, King delivered one of his most celebrated speeches.
I have a dream that one day on the red hills of Georgia, sons of former slaves and the sons of former slave owners will they be able to sit down together at the table of brotherhood. I have a dream.
At the urging of President Johnson, Congress passed the Civil Rights Act of 1964. This law banned discrimination in all public facilities and in employment. African Americans next turned their attention to winning voting rights. A group of college students called the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, or SNCC, staged what they called Freedom Summer. The group enlisted hundreds of volunteers to register African Americans to vote in Mississippi. The murder of 3 of these volunteers bolstered the fight for equal rights and motivated King to plan a march from Selma to Montgomery in Alabama. On Sunday, March 7, 1965, King led a group of protesters over a bridge to begin the march. Alabama's governor, George Wallace, sent state troopers to prevent the marchers from crossing. Police beat the marchers, giving the event the name Bloody Sunday. The nation was shocked, and President Lyndon Johnson announced a new policy aimed at winning African Americans the right to vote.
Because it's not just Negroes, but really it's all of us who must overcome the crippling legacy of bigotry and injustice. And we shall overcome.
Congress did pass the Voting Rights Act in 1965, and Johnson signed it into law. But the struggle for civil rights continued. In 1968, Martin Luther King was rallying support for a campaign to help the poor. On April 3rd of that year, He was standing on a motel balcony in Memphis, Tennessee, when an assassin took his life. The civil rights movement had many triumphs and many tragedies. But leaders like Rosa Parks and Martin Luther King Jr. helped win for African Americans the equal rights promised to all Americans.